Yeah, it's funny. I think that there's two ideas that you actually just presented, and both of them I can help take out of the theoretical realm and more into the operational realm, how it actually is applied, right? The first is that Big Pharma, as an example, buys so much ad space so they can put out ads. If you think about what I just explained with messages and narrative, right? Let's just say that you have a diabetes drug that comes out and produces multiple ads. Each of those ads has a different creative, meaning what you actually see in the ad is different. One is an ad where it's a young man and a young woman, and maybe they're dating and they're going out on the town and they're having a beautiful time, and they're going to a nightclub and they're going dancing and they're going to the opera, and here's the drug. This drug, essentially the message is this drug makes your life better for dating and for young life and for single life. That's one creative with multiple messages inside it. Now, the same company creates a second ad. And in that second ad, it's a young family. Maybe it's a mixed race, male and female, and they have a child or two, and the children are young, and they're going to the playground, and they're going to grandma's house, and they're going to the restaurant, and everybody's having a good time, right? Same product, different creative, same messages. This drug helps you go out and have fun with your family, with your children, and it's good for all ethnicities, all beliefs, all diversity. You can see how one pharmaceutical company could create 3, 4, 5 of these ads from the time that someone's young, maybe even when they're children, right? You see this with Crohn's disease ads. You'll see medicines for Crohn's and colitis that go from people being 12 and 13 years old, like on stage in high school, all the way up to being, in their late 60s and 70s, trying to go out and have fun on the beach with their spouse. The messaging here in each of these ads is very consistent. It has to do with freedom and a better life and more predictability and less trips to the bathroom, right? But what happens is to you and me and the average viewer, when we're hit with different creatives that all share the same message, we start to tell ourselves a story in our head. And that story in our head is usually something like, I'm not good enough alone. I need help from some sort of medicine. I already have insurance. I just need to call my insurance provider and make sure that this is covered. It's really hard to go to the gym. It's really hard to eat right. It's really hard to watch my diet. It's really hard to manage my sleep and stress levels. It would be so much easier because look at how easy these people in the ads have their life. Their life is so easy, right? That's the narrative. And then as people start to talk to each other, and moms talk to daughters, and friends talk to friends, and parents talk to children, and they start saying, hey, I know of this drug that might help, or I've just increased my insurance, or I changed my insurance so that we can get this drug to help make your life better or easier. That's how the narrative starts to spread and transform. So that's the first part of what you were talking about with Big Pharma takes out multiple ads, so much ad space. The second part of what you're saying is they build influence. Yes, they build influence by building the narrative with the audience, but then they also build influence because you're exactly right. They're the top client to the various same media outlets that are buying the ad time. So that means they get to negotiate their ads at premium peak hours at reduced prices. They get to dictate that they want more ad coverage. We want 5 ads a day instead of 2 ads a day, or we want 10 ads during prime time instead of 2 ads during prime time. And the media outlet has to acquiesce because they don't want to risk losing the client who will then just go to some competitor media channel. So you're right on both counts, but what drives both is an operational proven track record that we have in the intelligence world to build a narrative using messaging and to gain influence because people have what's known as FOMO, fear of missing out. The media outlet doesn't want to miss out on the opportunity to gain the revenue from the big pharma company that's currently commanding premium placement of their ads.
Whether it's a pharmaceutical company, whether it's another nation, whether it's our own government, part of your message, again, just part of it, there's a lot of layers to it, is that there are hidden forces that are out there that are trying to manipulate us. How do we become more unmanipulatable in our everyday lives? That could be from an individual person or friend or family member. And it could also be from companies and countries, even our own government, that might be trying to get us to think one way? How do we become more free and more independent in our approach?
The starting place to understand how to, what we call harden, right? You're talking about hardening yourself, basically. Just like you would harden a building against a rocket blast, or you would harden your front door against an intruder. You're talking about hardening an individual's susceptibility to outside influence or outside factors. There's a spectrum that we talk about in CIA. A spectrum where on one side of the spectrum, kind of like a color spectrum, on one side of the spectrum is security, and on the other side of the spectrum is convenience. The closer you get to convenience, the further you get from being secure or being hardened. The closer you get to security, the further you get from convenience, meaning things get difficult, things take more effort, they happen slower, they get more expensive. You have to understand the spectrum in order to really start coming up with a plan to do exactly what you said, to make yourself less susceptible to influence, to make yourself less malleable to outside factors. Foreign governments, even the US federal government, as well as all of your advertising efforts, are all about making sure that people continually slide in the direction of convenience. Your phone is very convenient, which is why it's not very secure, right? It's very convenient to get a home mortgage or a loan. And that's because once you do, your information is public, right? It's much less secure than buying a home with cash or buying a home using some sort of tool that doesn't require a bank loan. The same thing is true when it comes to the health and wellness services that are out there. When the government provides a solution, it becomes very convenient for you, but it becomes less secure. It opens you to more influence and more factors that can change your opinion or sway your opinion. The way that you harden yourself against that is that you recognize the spectrum and then you specifically look out for the question, is this convenient? And if something is convenient, you have to start adding layers of effort to make it less convenient. As an example, if you read a news article in the Washington Times or the Washington Post that says anything, right? THC is safe for children under the age of 10. Who knows what it says? You read it somewhere, that's convenient. The next thing you have to do is vet that information. You have to say, is that really true? Can I find that information anywhere else? Can I find it in another newspaper? Can I find it in a medical journal? Can I find it in a peer-reviewed blog? Can I find it stated by an influencer? Can I find it in a foreign journal? But you yourself have to put the effort into doing that research because the Washington Post already knew most people who read this are just going to believe it. They're not actually going to do the research. And that amplifies itself across the board, right? If you look at what's happening in the world right now, there's drones over New York, right? People are panicking about the drones over New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Maryland. And the information that's out there is just being recycled over and over again. I was actually watching a CNN report the other day, and they called in a drone pilot to say, tell us about these drones. What was shocking to me was that the host of the broadcast, the CNN host, never knew that drones had automatic ceilings, that drones had to be registered, that drones couldn't fly in certain spaces in terms of the limitations of their software, right? So what that showed me is that CNN had been reporting on this for 24 hours a day for multiple days in a row. But it wasn't until this drone expert came on that one of the core beliefs of the host was challenged. So you can see that the medium that's bringing you information is obviously ignorant of the information itself, which is why they seek to bring you other voices about that information, which makes it so that you're limited only to what that media source brings you if you want to trust the information. That is a convenient but not secure way of getting information.
So it seems like part of becoming more hardened, which is again, becoming more anti-fragile, to use, a phrase that some people know out there, when it comes to information, is making sure you actually go out of your way to hear argument from the other side of things, quote unquote. Like right now, there's a national campaign to make it sound like things like removing fluoride from our water, which many dentists have come on our podcast and have talked about the pros and cons, what the challenge is, and some of the research that has not been looked at by the EPA showing a serious cause for concern, especially when it comes to young children, in particular, their IQ being potentially damaged by total exposure to fluoride. Now, because this has become a tribal thing, which many things can become, there's a left, there's a right. Depending on who you're reading, you're immediately deciding that, hey, I trust this viewpoint, so I'm going to adopt this belief. And it's very hard work to actually say, well, what does the other side think, quote unquote, the other side of any topic? What do they think about this topic? And can I articulate what they think, at least to a reasonable degree that I can explain it to somebody else? And one of the things that people quickly find is they actually don't often know what the other side thinks to a degree that they could articulate it, which shows they may not have a true understanding of the landscape. I'm not telling anybody to agree with any ideas, but at least explain to me what the other side thinks without writing them off as crazy. That's a very hard thing for many people to do. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, you're exactly right. It's what you're talking about is in the human brain. The human brain is actually inherently lazy. If folks don't realize that, it's an important thing to understand. The brain is organically built to conserve energy, conserve resources for those rare moments where massive resources are required, because the brain's primary goal is to survive. So for that reason, the brain creates these biases, what you've heard of as cognitive biases. It creates these biases because biases are a shortcut to reaching a conclusion without having to put any cognitive load on the brain itself. So when you hear about the in-group bias, or when you hear about the confirmation bias, or you hear about the bandwagoning bias, these are all shortcuts that the brain develops over time so that it can reach a conclusion when information is presented without having to critically think about that information. When new information is presented that generates a cognitive load that is in contrast to the core belief of the brain, something called cognitive dissonance occurs. Cognitive dissonance is that effort, that strain, that pain in your brain when you're trying to hear something that you don't believe, right? When you're trying to hear people talk about a different faith, or when you try to hear people talk about, what they want from their children that's different than what you want from your children, that difficulty is called cognitive dissonance, and the brain likes to avoid cognitive dissonance. When you intentionally seek out information from the opposite side, like you're saying, Drew, that is guaranteed to create cognitive dissonance. That is essentially like quitting smoking by going cold turkey. It is a very difficult thing to do. It's actually kind of 2 or 3 steps further than what I would recommend people do first. If you're liberal and you want to test the information that liberal media is giving you, don't start listening to Fox News. That's going to be the exact opposite. That's a huge 180-degree shift. Instead, start reading European news, because Europe is very liberal. But Europe has a very different structure than we do here in the United States. If you think about going back to our conversation about taxes, inside the United States, the average person pays about 19% taxes. That's why the government relies so much on big corporations to build their tax base, because they can only get about 19% from the average citizen. Across Europe, the average tax base is closer to 40%, which means the government doesn't need corporations to fill its tax base. Individuals pay those taxes. So corporations have less sway, less impact in Europe than they do in the United States. So if you want to know if what you're reading in your liberal newspaper or your left-leaning media in the United States is correct, you can actually start looking for corroboration in French newspapers and Spanish newspapers and British newspapers and German newspapers. They're written in English, so can you find the same information corroborating what you've got here? It's going to be much less difficult to get new information that's vetted rather than by going and trying to search Fox News, because values are also totally different between the left and the right. So what makes headlines for a left-leaning newspaper may not even make the back page for a right-leaning newspaper, because the values of those political bases are so different.
That's great advice.